You raised a wonderful lady together with the family, and now being the executive director of the St. Philip's Institute for Catechesis and Evangelization. We are blessed. Without taking much time, while we enjoy your wonderful breakfast, then we turn on Dr. Stacy Trasancos to do the presentation.
Okay, while you're settling in, I'll ease into this. Just wanted to start by telling you a little bit about how I even came to standing here talking about Eucharistic miracles. It's kind of a miracle in itself, because we got this email from the bishop right before Christmas, and it was a video, a YouTube video of the Buenos Aires Eucharistic miracle. And I didn't even want to watch it. The bishop is very encouraging to us to think about what the Eucharist is, to realize that it's the true presence, the body and blood of Christ. And he sent it to us, and he said maybe the Institute should talk about miracles, and that would really help people's faith. I do a lot of talking about faith and science. My background is in chemistry. It started at what used to be called the East Texas State University in Commerce. And I went to school here in Paris, K through 12. Trudy Hilliard was my chemistry and biology teacher, if anybody recognizes that name. And so I got very comfortable. I won't tell you my whole life story, but I grew up Baptist here, and I had a lot of questions. And I was very confused because the people at the Church of Christ said they were going to heaven, and it scared me a lot because I didn't think Baptists were going to heaven. And then I got into all these arguments with people because the Methodists said, no, we're the only ones going to heaven. And I started to get very desperate and thought maybe none of these religions are true because everybody thinks they're the only ones going to heaven. So I went and studied science. I studied science at East Texas State University. I went on to Penn State University. Before that, I taught chemistry in Athens at a high school there for 2 years. And loving science led me back to Christ because I found the church, and to make a long story short, I found the truth. I realized that God is the creator of all those atoms and molecules of electrons and protons and neutrons and quarks and bosons and the things doing their thing, holding us all together right now. Intellectually, I didn't have a problem with miracles. If God can make a periodic table, surely God can make things do differently at times and work miracles. I mean, if God can do all of that, He can do all that stuff you learn from kids in biology and chemistry and physics class that makes you break your thesis because the world's that order, He can certainly work miracles. He's God. He can do anything. So I had no intellectual problem with miracles. But when the bishop sent me that video about a Eucharistic miracle in Buenos Aires, actually where Pope Francis was when he was the bishop, and it was approved by him, I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see it, and it's not because I didn't believe in miracles. It's because I was afraid that if I got the chance to look at the data, because I did a lot of analytical chemistry. I worked for DuPont after I got my PhD. I was afraid if I looked at the data, I might realize that somebody was lying to the church. That it might not say what people thought it said, that maybe people were a little too eager to see red stuff and call it tissue. And I didn't want to know because I didn't want to have to deal with that. I can't even put it right into words, but I just didn't want to know. And I didn't want to look at it. And the bishop said that, and so I had to give a response to the bishop. So I said, well, that's great. That's really nice. And we were going to leave it at that. He's like, maybe y'all should talk about this. And I said, maybe. I'm really not comfortable talking about it unless I see the data. And I have no idea how to get the data, to look at it. Because otherwise, I'm just going to stand up and talk about what other people saw and what other people interpreted, and a scientist never does that. If you're going to put your name behind something, you need to see the analytical results, and you need to see the data so you can say, yep, that's how I interpret it. And so I didn't really want to do it, and God's like, you're saying to the bishop, no. And I knew that I shouldn't do that. So I said, all right, I'll buy a book. And I did. This is the book. I had no idea Father Denzil had this book stored here already in the form of all these wonderful posters that you have. But it happens to be the same book. I got this book because these are the Vatican-approved miracles, and I thought, well, they probably know how to interpret data or get the right people. The Vatican probably knows what it's talking about. So I got this book because these are the Vatican-approved miracles. And they're mostly going to be in the slides today. So I just want to tell you, first of all, you won't be able to read everything on the slides. I just put them up there to sort of show you where I am in the book. But these slides are the things that you're going to be able to see up close in the wonderful exhibit. And I hope that exhibit gets to travel around the diocese. I think every Christian, even the ones who are not Catholic, should see that this is the truth. So that was a bit of providence right there. But the story kept going. The man who sent the video about the miracle in Buenos Aires was Dr. Oscar Paniagua, who is a cardiologist in Tyler, a heart surgeon. He knows a thing or two about hearts and data, and he's a medical doctor. And it goes even more than that. The reason Dr. Paniagua sent the video to the bishop, who sent it to me, was because Dr. Paniagua's daughter was not paying attention in Mass, and her mother, Dr. Paniagua's wife, said, you have to go look up what the Eucharist is and learn about it since you weren't paying attention in Mass. She's a lovely little girl, and she knows that her daddy told the story, so it's okay. Thanks to that little girl, she found the video about the miracle in Buenos Aires, and she sent it to her dad. Her dad sent it to the bishop, and the bishop sent it to me, and I bought a book that Father Denzil had already in the storage. And so that gave me some confidence to start reading about the book. And to put the talk together. And I said, I'm going to do a talk at the cathedral, and like 30 people registered, and I got there, it was a Monday night, it was raining. There were over 100 people that showed up. And I realized that this is something people want to know about. It's something we need to know about. And the more I read, some of you I know have seen this book too. It's the one by John Carroll Cruz. I got this book, and I got the one with the Vatican-approved miracles, and put together a talk. There's more to the story, but I'll save that for later. First, I want to make sure, so when you're thinking through the things in the church, you got to start with the basics and build from there. Transubstantiation is a word, I'm thankful to say, thanks to Father Matthew Staling in Lindale, Texas, where we live, is a word my children know. Because when they were we're going to have 4 teenage daughters in our house in 2020. I have 7 children, 2 are grown, I have 5 grandchildren. My oldest daughter just had twins, and she's got 3 others. My son's in the Navy. We have 5 kids at home, 4 of them are girls, 2 are teenagers now, 2 are about to be teenagers, and then we have 1 lone little 8-year-old boy named JJ. My girls know what transubstantiation is because we moved to the diocese, and there's the restored order of confirmation. They all 4 got confirmed at the same time, and they did their interview with Father Matthew Staling. And the bonus question was, what do we call that special conversion when the substance of the bread and the wine become the substance of the body and blood of Christ, but you see no change? My oldest daughter knew it was transubstantiation, so she got the bonus question right because she'd been going to Colby Academy and we learned those things. And she was homeschooled for a while. But when she came out, she whispered to her sisters, transubstantiation. And then when the next one came out, transubstantiation. And so the word sort of morphed by the time it got down to little Lucy, the youngest. But Father Stelling was so impressed that my daughters always were. They didn't, but they do now. They remember it now because they were so scared. But transubstantiation, as a chemist, I'm here to tell you, the only case of transubstantiation is the Eucharist. Okay? In chemistry, how many of you had chemistry in high school? How many of you loved it? Come on. Just glad chemistry in high school, you learn what a substance is. And you learn that if one substance, like hydrogen and oxygen gas, become another substance like water, bonds have to break. The hydrogen and the oxygen have to break apart from each other. There's two of them together, and they're like, I'll see ya, we want to go be a water molecule. And they reform as a water molecule. Bonds break, bonds reform. For the longest time when I became a Catholic in 2006, and still to this day, when I'm kneeling, looking at the Eucharist, I'm like, when does it become the body and blood? When does it come? What nanosecond does it happen? That's another story. There's no nanosecond. But I kept going, what are the electrons doing? What bonds are being broken? What are the electrons doing? And I know they're not doing anything different. That's the point. This is a change of substance where no bonds are broken and no new bonds form. The same molecular structure of bread and wine is still there when it's the body and blood of Christ. But the substance changes anyway. Why does the substance change anyway? Can someone tell me? It's a little bitty word. It's much smaller than transubstantiation. It's because Christ said, this is my body. He said so. Is, I-S. He said, this is my body. And it's a unique change in that sense, that chemically nothing happens, but the substance changes anyway, because the creator of the world said it does every time we're Mass. So that's transubstantiation in terms of chemistry. What is a miracle? I think of miracles like this. You know, like my husband's he was born in Cuba, and we're pretty by the rules, like disciplined about keeping a routine in our home. That's a good thing, right? You need to have discipline and rules and order and structure, because then all the kids know that we're going to say brush your teeth tonight before you go to bed. They just know to respect it. They can say don't want to, they know they're going to have to. It's the order. I think of miracles kind of like God created this universe with such order that we can put elements in the periodic table and predict what will happen when you do certain things chemically. We can make smartphones and build buildings and plant trees. We know the order's there. We know what's going to happen when we do things. But occasionally, if the loving Father, all he did was keep the order, if all he ever did was just, he may as well just turn away and not even pay attention to us anymore. That wouldn't be love. The loving Father every now and then says, guess what, kids? We're going to go get ice cream instead of dinner tonight. Occasionally, the loving Father suspends those rules to show you how much he loves you. And that's what I think of as Eucharistic miracles. They're the ice cream. They're God saying, I am really here, just in case you didn't think I was. So a miracle then, this is the theological language back from the 5th century with St. Augustine and with St. Aquinas in the 13th century. The church has pretty much always had her head around this. A miracle is anything against the order of nature. Anything against the order of nature which we know. So we know what to expect. We don't usually see blood dripping from the host in Mass. I mean, can you imagine? if you ever did. We don't usually see it, but when a miracle occurs, it's something outside of that order, something unexpected. So that's what miracles are. That's what transubstantiation is. This was important to me, and I think it is important to know, because there's lots of people who will say, I saw a miracle. I was all by myself and I saw a miracle. How do you know? Like, the church says that we're free to believe things like that, but we don't have to. We don't have to even believe the Eucharistic miracles, but they are approved. How does a miracle, a Eucharistic miracle, get approved? If one of you ever sees blood dripping from the Eucharist, or boiling out of the chalice, or anything like that, you let the bishop know, okay? You have to let Bishop Strickland know about it, okay? Bishop Strickland he could involve the Holy See. He will launch a theological and scientific investigation of experts from anywhere. He will pull together an investigative team. The research could take years because they want to confirm it and make sure these are miracles. Once the alleged miracle has been studied and confirmed by the experts, they tell the bishop, and the bishop says, yep, I think this miracle happened. Okay, so that's what we mean when we say approved miracles. All right, so y'all ready to get into them? I took 10 miracles, just to tell you how I structured this. There's 126, right, Father Denzil? 126 Eucharistic miracles that are approved, that are in this book. I picked 10 of them to sort of fit together the story, because we don't have time to go through all of them. You have 4 days to go through all of them over there, and maybe you'll look up these 10 that I'm going to talk about. The first one is this, I think I don't have it. Okay, so like I said, I know that you can't read those little letters, okay? Can you all see that it says Bolsena, Italy, 1264? That's the main thing. Okay, so what we think is that when miracles usually happen, not always, there is an element of doubt, okay? In a lot of the cases of miracles, the poor priest was doubting, and I've heard priests tell me this. They're holding it up, they're like, I believe, I believe, I believe. It's such an amazing miracle I just look at it, but I can't even imagine what it would be like to be there. And there are times when priests had doubts. Well, this first one is a time in 1263, so a really long time ago. A priest from Prague who was traveling in Italy was celebrating Mass in the Basilica at Bolsena. He doubted. He was pious, but he found it difficult to accept that Christ was actually present in the consecrated host. What happened? While celebrating Mass at the tomb of St. Christina, who was a martyr, he spoke the words of consecration, and immediately blood, and I'm reading some things from here because there's some testimony and quotes, and I want to get it exactly right. Immediately blood started to seep from the consecrated host and trickle over his hands onto the altar. Can you imagine? He tried to hide the blood because he was probably a little bit freaked out. He eventually had to stop the Mass and asked for the bleeding host to be taken to Pope Urban IV, who was nearby. Does anyone know where this story's going? Because it's so amazing. You'll find this one out in the gym. Pope Urban IV asked, so notice it's 1263. This is in the time of St. Thomas Aquinas, who wrote the Summa Theologia. Pope Urban went and got St. Thomas Aquinas, that was the theologian and scientist of the day, and they investigated it. And, they don't have in those days they didn't have, in the Middle Ages, they didn't have elemental analysis equipment like we have in our labs today. So St. Thomas was like, yep, that's blood. And they confirmed it was blood. They confirmed from interviewing people that it happened. There's testimony. Pope Urban IV was prompted by the miracle to commission St. Thomas Aquinas to compose the Mass and Liturgy of the Hours to celebrate the most holy body of the Lord. What feast is that? Yes. This is where the feast of the Corpus Christi comes from, the body of Christ. It comes from a Eucharistic miracle in the 13th century. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote the office for the Mass and Liturgy of the Hours, and by means of a papal bull, the feast of Corpus Christi was instituted. So that's the first one. The next one I want to talk about goes to Austria. So I want you to notice how they're all over the world. That's what this is called, the Eucharistic miracles of the world. So, you know, for someone like me who's like, I don't know if they really happened. It was the 13th century. What if, like, Pope Urban IV and St. Thomas Aquinas all got together and they're like, just tell everybody it's wrong. You know, like, what if they were just like, just say it was? And that got passed down through time. How would you know? And people do make that argument. Maybe they were just all agreed to lie to us. Doesn't seem likely, but that's one thing people say when they talk about the Eucharistic miracles that really happened. That's why it's important to look at this exhibition. They happened all over the world. That would have to be a pretty big conspiracy over 2,000 years, like other things we believe about our faith, for it not to be true. This one's in Austria. Again, the priest was seized with doubts regarding the real presence of Jesus. Right after the consecration, this time the wine changed into blood and began to boil and overflow out of the chalice. You can't really hide that. This was in 1480, or no, it happened in 1310, so even older. In 1480, 170 years later, the precious blood was still fresh as though flowing from a wound. How many kids ever scraped your knee and the blood flows? Is it still fresh 170 years later? It's not still fresh even 5 minutes later. It starts to coagulate, the next day it turns black. It was still fresh, like red and flowing. The precious blood is preserved intact to this day at the reliquary at the monastery of St. Wurtemberg. You can go there and see it. It's been guarded almost all that time. The next one is in Italy. Again, back in Italy. Ofida. This one was also in the Middle Ages, the early Middle Ages, 1273. You'll see why I put this one in my lineup of 10 miracles. Ladies, this one's for you. Near the church of St. Augustine, there was a couple that lived. Their names were Ricciarella, was the woman, and her husband's name was Giacomo. Ricciarella was concerned that her husband didn't love her. And so she went to a witch. They had witches back then. And she said to the witch, "How can I regain the affections of my husband?" The witch gave her this advice. The next time you go to communion, don't ever do this. Steal a consecrated host. Don't put it in your mouth. Don't eat it. Take it home. When you get home, put the host in the fire. And then put it in an earthenware jar when you get the ashes. Put it in an earthenware jar. And turn it into a powder. And put that powder in your husband's food. And you'll regain his affections. I'm here to tell you, there are much better ways taught by the Catholic Church to gain the affections of your children. When you talk to Deanna Johnson, our Director of Family Life, she's got all kinds of things. Much to Ricciarella's amazement and horror, when she threw the consecrated host that she had stolen into the fire, it did not burn. And so she freaked out. She, terrified, got it out. She wrapped it up in some cloth. She put it in the earthenware jar. And then she went out to Giacomo's stable where he kept the donkeys. And underneath the manure pile, she buried it. She's like trying to hide it. It stayed there for 7 years. And totally not working out the way she planned it, the donkeys started to do really strange things. Giacomo's donkeys, and I'm going to read this because y'all think I'm making it up. Strange events began to take place in this stable. Every time Giacomo's donkeys entered, they would genuflect toward the place where the miraculous hosts were buried. So it's not working out too well. Giacomo thought that his wife had put a curse on his beasts. 7 years later, Ricciarella, tormented by remorse, confessed her terrible sacrilege to the prior of the Augustinian priory in Lanciano. This was in Lanciano where another ritual took place. She went there screaming, crying, terrified, repentant. They dug up the host. They were still intact. They preserved them for many years, but then they were destroyed. But Ricciarella's house now has been built into a chapel where you can go and learn about this miracle. The next one is also in Italy. Notice I'm sticking to the old ones for now. I'm making the point, or to me it made the point, that these things happened over time in many different places. And even though there was no analytical equipment to measure what happened, the testimony of people is believable. If you see it, that's worth something. And people were interviewed, and these things were written down. This next one is also in Italy, but moving up a little bit into the 15th century, into 1412. Again, there was a priest, Father Lazarus de Verona, while celebrating Holy Mass, was assailed by strong doubts about the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. He had just pronounced the words of consecration over the wine when it was transformed into living blood and began to overflow the chalice and spill onto the corporal. He was profoundly moved to repentance. The cloth where the blood spilt on, you can't see it very well. You can still travel there and see it. It's still around. This is where, and there are paintings. You can see these up close when you go to the exhibit. There are paintings that show that the blood is there. I chose this one because over 500 years later, in 1912, so we're moving up into the 20th century now, over 500 years later after this happened, a cardinal and an archbishop decided to take, on the 5th centenary, the 500-year anniversary of the miracle, they decided to get a chemical analysis done. They took that cloth, and on the marks where the blood are, at the University of Florence in Italy, the analysis confirmed that the stains were actually blood. What that means is they did the same test they would do on anything else, and it gave the same results that you would always expect when it's blood. So it was confirmed by those methods to be blood. In 1958, so moving up probably into some of our lifetimes now, in 1958, another bishop, His Excellency Domenico Bornegia, had a chemical analysis done on the marks again, and also confirmed with more modern methods, and I don't know what they were. This is what was troubling me at first. It just says it was confirmed it was blood. And I'm like, well, how do you know? So I don't know. But there was a chemical analysis done and approved by the bishop that it was blood. So we've taken this one that was 500 years later, brought it up into more recent times. This one is because it's Easter. Involves bunny rabbits. It's a little bit more of a colorful story too. It happened in Belgium, also in the 15th century. The way this story goes, so not all Eucharistic miracles involve blood and flesh. This one, there was a thief who was known to steal sacred objects. Apparently that was a big thing in those times. And he stole consecrated host one time and tried to run away with them. And when he got out into the field, the thief later testified that every time he tried to throw the host away, they came back to him. Like, he couldn't get rid of them. And they kept coming back to him. And so he went and he put them, I have no idea why he did this. He put them in a rabbit's nest, like a place where the rabbits sit. And they stayed there. And so he thought that he had gotten rid of them. When he was later captured and investigated, and they realized that he was the one who had stolen the consecrated hosts from the church, he confessed, and he was sentenced to be hanged. And so he was climbing the scaffold, getting ready to be hanged, and the priest said, "No, I suspend the execution. He seems repentant. This is about getting people to heaven." So they gave him another chance. If he would testify, they wanted to find the Blessed Sacrament and restore it to a safe place. He took them out to where the rabbits were. You see the drawing. He took them back out to the field where the rabbits were, and it had been raining for days. And you know what happens. That's one thing if you accidentally drop one on the floor, the priest puts it in water. Why? Because it will dissolve. These had been laying there with the rabbits in the rain, in creation, in nature, for days, and they hadn't dissolved. They were intact, said they were arranged like a cross, and they recovered them. So that's just another example of a miracle. These things happened that didn't have any explanation. Like, even if somebody had arranged them that way, there's no explanation for why they were unaffected by rain over several days. Moving up to the last one of the older miracles. Another one in Italy. There are a lot of them that were in Italy. I think that's probably because that's where better record keeping was done, so there may have been others in other places. In 1604, so we've moved up 400 years since I started talking, and I'm going to get to the Lanciano miracle in a minute. It goes back to the 700s. This one is different because two men who were in mortal sin, are you supposed to receive Christ if you're in mortal sin? No. The bishop's very clear about that. Two men who were in mortal sin received the Eucharist on their tongue, and it started to burn them. And they spit it out because it was burning so bad. It was kind of a commotion. You can see the painting here. They spit it out. They realized that what they had done is wrong. They left. After the whole episode was over, the priest was trying, he cleaned up. He retrieved the Blessed Sacraments. And he saw that on the stone where the two hosts had fallen, there was a dent, an imprint. You see it on the picture? So this is why the exhibition that Father Denzil put together is so important. You can go up close and look at these actual pictures. Even more, you can travel there and see it to this day. The priest could not scrub, scrape, He couldn't do anything to get those 2 marks off the stone, and they're still there now. These hosts fell. You can see they're a perfect circle. You can't just chisel that in with bread. So something happened there, and it's just another mark that we can see. All right, how many of you have heard of Lanciano? Yeah, that's the big one. That's usually the miracle that you think of when you think of Eucharistic miracles. This picture up here is usually the picture you see. That's the flesh. Let me tell you about this one, because there have been studies done on this one. Okay, the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano. Now this goes way back. I started talking 12, 13, 14, 1600s. This goes back much closer to the time of Christ, to the 700s. I mean, still 700 years later, but back to the 700s. In Lanciano, so this is a pretty familiar story, and it goes like the other ones did. There was a priest who was celebrating Mass when he pronounced the words of consecration, so he was doubting. He doubted whether the body of our Lord was truly present in the consecrated host. When he pronounced the words, he saw that the host turned into flesh and the wine turned into blood. Both. All of this is still visible to this day. Today, and I would love to go see this myself, the blood coagulated into 5 chunks. Okay, like it coagulated over time. This is all the way from the year 750. The blood coagulated into chunks. To this day, if you go there and you get a balance, like in the chemistry labs, you know, the balance is that you can get the mass of something. This is unheard of. If you put each chunk, okay, it's like say that this table here are the 5 chunks. if we have Father Gomez stand on the scale and we get his weight, there it is, okay? And then he leaves. And we have this lady in pink stand on the scale. She doesn't look exactly the same size as Father Gomez, but the weight is still the same. And then you, same weight, same weight, same weight. All 5 chunks of the blood have the same weight. Now what do you think happens if all 5 of you get on the scale together? The weight would be, you break it? You would expect the weight to be 5 times greater. It's the same. The way the book says it, the flesh is still intact and the blood is divided into 5 unequal parts, which together weigh the same as each one does separately. And so that's just a little, God's got a sense of humor. It's like, hello? It's real simple. Like there is absolutely nothing you can do to explain that. It should not happen. It should not happen. But that wasn't all. Okay, the nice thing about the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano is that in 1971, so this is in my lifetime, in 1971, they got a doctor in Rome. His name is Dr. Edward Linoli. The report he wrote is called the Linoli Report. I've seen it. It's in Italian. I can't read Italian, but I could tell enough about what he was saying. He published his report in a scientific journal. People say, why don't they publish them all in scientific journals? One, the scientific journals won't publish them for the fact that it's just not repeatable. It's not really a science, it's a miracle. And another is, probably they don't want to. There seems to be some hiding of this truth, which is why we're trying not to hide it. The Linoli report in 1971 by Dr. Edward Linoli, he was a professor of anatomy, histology, chemistry, and clinical microscopy at, who was he? The University of Florence, I believe. part of the investigation. And in his report, and I'm reading here because I want to get his report as he said it. He said the miraculous flesh is authentic flesh. It's really flesh, that picture here. He studied it. It's really flesh. Not only that, it is muscle tissue. It is flesh consisting of muscular striated tissue of the myocardium. That means heart tissue. The miraculous blood is truly blood. The chromatographic analysis indicated this with absolute and indisputable certainty. So chromatography, students in chemistry, that's when you take like the ink from a pen and you put it in tissue with some alcohol, and as the alcohol rises, it separates out the dyes. With blood, if you do something like that, blood is pretty consistently made up of the same proteins, and you see a certain result. And so it was consistent with that result. It's hard to reproduce that exactly. I mean, it's a good indication that it is what you think it is, blood. The immunological study showed with certitude that the flesh and blood are human, so they have ways to determine that it's not rabbit blood or monkey blood or something else. The immunohematological test confirmed with certainty, so they're looking at the hemoglobin, and then they typed it. That's one of the ways they typed the blood. They confirmed that the blood is type. Who knows what type the blood is for all of these? AB. This blood is type AB. It's the same. It's the same type of blood that they found on the Shroud of Turin. It's the same type of blood that is most characteristic of Middle Eastern populations. So consistently in these Eucharistic miracles, all the time it's been type AB blood, and that's what's in the Shroud of Turin as well. That's also most characteristic of Middle Eastern populations, which is where Jesus lived. The proteins contained in the blood have the normal distribution in the identical percentage of that of the Sirius protease chart for normal flesh blood. Again, they do, if they draw blood from one of us, they do a test on this, exact same results. And it's based on the molecular structure, and it's not easy to repeat that unless it is the identical substance. They couldn't find any preservatives or salt. So this is from 750 all the way up to 1971. They did test for preservatives, none. They were accused of lying, indeed, and Professor Linoli said fine. He went to the United Nations, to the World Health Organization, and said, you study it. And these reports are hard to find. I haven't been able to put my finger on them on the internet, and I'm not done yet. I would like to see those reports. But according to this book, the World Health Organization appointed a scientific commission to corroborate Linoli's findings. The work lasted 15 months and included 500 different tests. It was verified that Linoli was right. It wasn't mummified tissue. It was blood. It was flesh, heart tissue. The extract summarizing the scientific work of the Medical Commission of the World Health Organization and the United Nations, published in December of 1976, 5 years later, at a conference in New York and in Geneva, Switzerland, they declared in public, these people who were not with the Catholic Church, these are independent scientists, that science, aware of its limits, has come to a halt, face to face with the impossibility of giving an explanation. And that's one reason the Lanciano miracle is so powerful. You can still see the 5 chunks of blood that defy basic, simple physics. And you can still see the flesh. The next one is in Tixla, Mexico. Look at the date on this one. Sorry. In 2006, there was a retreat, and I'm going to read this slide. It began in 2006. Father Leopoldo, one of the priests, and another priest were distributing communion, assisted by a religious sister, who was to the left of Father Raimundo. The sister turned toward Father, you can see the cartoon here, holding the ciborium containing the sacred particles, her eyes filled with tears. This immediately attracted the celebrant's attention. The host that she had taken to give communion to a parishioner had begun to ooze a red substance. Can you imagine? Began to ooze a red substance. And so she was astonished. And so what happens is, you'll see a picture of it when you get out to the exhibit. They have a picture of what happened. They took pictures of it, because this was just 2006. This was the year I converted it. This wasn't that long ago. She just saw the bread appear. Now, some people thought it was a bacteria. There is a bacteria. Have you ever seen red bread mold? Okay, I've never seen that. Like, the mold on the bread in my house doesn't turn red. But there's such a thing, and it's called Serratia marcescens. A lot of people criticize this miracle and said that's just bread mold. But here's the thing. The bread mold doesn't appear instantly. Also, if you put the bread mold under a microscope, have you ever seen bacteria under microscopes in chemistry, biology class rather? It kind of looks like, this particular one looks like a little plant with lots of strings coming out. It looks nothing like blood. So all they had to do was put this under a microscope. It was not the bacteria. What it was, can you see this? I'm pointing these out so you'll know what to look for. Not only did it not look anything like bacteria, it looked exactly like hard tissue. And they had that confirmed by doctors. The Mexican ecclesiastical authorities turned to a man named Dr. Castañón Gomez, maybe related. And he was asked to study this miracle in 2006 because he also studied, getting back to that, the Buenos Aires miracle, the one that the bishop sent me that started all this. Dr. Gomez, Dr. Gomez had studied the Buenos Aires miracles back in the 1990s, which I'm getting to. He was called to study this miracle in Tixla, Mexico, also, because he knew something about these, and he had studied it before. And he confirmed, again, that this is, in fact, like, it's almost getting repetitive now. Heart tissue. And the way this was done is an international symposium. So let's see, on October 2009 and again in October 2012, before a symposium, an international symposium held by where they live, the Diocese of Chilpancingo. For the Year of Faith in 2013, when the studies got conducted, so they did studies over many years, 5 years or so. He announced to the international community, the reddish substance analyzed corresponds to blood, in which there are hemoglobin and DNA of human origin. So the story deepens. 2 studies conducted by eminent forensic experts. Forensic experts are the ones that do autopsies, with different methods, have shown that the substance originates from the interior, excluding the hypothesis that somebody painted the blood on, because that was one of the criticisms. See this disc? You can't see it very well here, but when they broke the host, when they looked inside at what happened, if you had painted red blood on the host, if somebody was trying to do a trick and they painted it, these diagrams here show it, so look at it closely. If somebody painted it on top, it would have soaked in all those places. When they looked inside, the blood was coming from one source, outward. You can't make it do that. You can't paint anything on top of a surface and cause it to soak in one place. It's uniformly porous throughout. It doesn't happen. It was coming from inside, and this is another simple confirmation. A microscopic analysis, so looking at it through the microscope, revealed that the tissue looked like the upper part of the blood had coagulated since 2006, but the underlying part of the blood inside was still red and living. Now, what does that mean to say the blood is still living? Have any of you ever heard that the blood in these miracles is still living? What it means that it's still living is that it's still undergoing chemical reactions as if it were in your body. That's not supposed to happen. They also find white blood cells. Now here's the thing with white blood cells, and I talked with Dr. Oscar Paniagua about it, and I mean, you can find this in the literature. White blood cells die within minutes after they come out of your body. The cells burst, they die. White blood cells, this is one way forensic pathologists know if they're looking at someone who was recently killed or recently died, there's the presence of white blood cells. Because if the person's been dead for more than a day, the white blood cells are gone. They were still there. They were still there, white blood cells. So it looked like it was from someone who had just died, even though it was many years later. A further analysis of the protein structure suggested that they were in a state of deterioration, that when the person died, he was suffering. The immunohistochemical studies, so they're looking at the chemistry of the blood, reveal that the tissue corresponds. So not only does it look like heart tissue, the immunohistochemical studies also had the same chemical composition as heart tissue. And so the bishop of Chilpancingo said and announced, the event does not have a natural explanation. It does not have a paranormal origin. It is not traceable to manipulation by the enemy. He said the intervention comes from God. It is of divine origin. The alteration of the causes or natural laws is evident. Whoever accepts the miracle recognizes or accepts with an act of faith that the extraordinary event comes from the loving will of God. It has as its end the good of one or many people. God works miracles for us. He doesn't have to. That's what the church believes about miracles, that God does these for us. The Buenos Aires miracles, which I keep talking about, I'm finally back to it. This is number 9. So there were 3 of them that occurred over a 4-year period of time, 1992, 1994, 1996. This was about after I graduated from high school. In 1992, I would have been in commerce. By 1994, I had moved to Penn State to get as far away from East Texas as I could. I was a kid. And this isn't that long ago, though. That's the point. So the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, who is none other than our current Pope Francis, he was the bishop that somebody came to and said. So this happened 3 times. And it was something that was a little bit concerning, because if Eucharistic miracles happen when there's doubt, and it keeps happening over and over again in a 4-year period of time in your diocese, it's like they were trying to understand why that keeps happening. But it was similar every time. It was similar in that during communion, there's cartoons that show the events exactly as they happen, but all 3 times, it was something like they looked at the consecrated host and saw red stuff on it. One of them was when it dropped to the floor and the priest picked it up, and what you're supposed to do is put it in water to dissolve, right, and put it back in the altar, and you let it dissolve so that it's properly taken care of. They put it in the water and stored it, and it's when they came back a few days later that the red stuff was there. And so some people did say that's red mold. It's musty, it's the water.
there's bread mold. But not only did the host not dissolve, it had this red stuff growing on it. And like I said, it's pretty easy to rule out red mold. You just look at it under a microscope. It's very simple. It wasn't bread mold. Okay, so they had these miracles from 1992, 1994, 1996, similar things. They saw the red stuff on the consecrated host. They gave it over to some scientists to study. And this is where Dr. Gomez came in the first time. He studied 2 of these miracles. That's him. No, he's not there. So he's on the pictures you'll see. I don't have him on the slide. Dr. Gomez was there. He did a lot of writing about these Eucharistic miracles. But he, again, and it's getting repetitive. But I'm here to tell you, once again, they did the analysis, and it was heart tissue. It was living. It was type AB, had the white blood cells present, human DNA, proteins just as you would expect in human blood. So all those things putting together. And human DNA, yeah. And so this is the one. So, by now, I hope, I don't know, I don't want to bore you, but I'm trying to drive home the point, because there's nothing that makes a scientist more certain than for things to be repeatable. Keeps happening. So as they were able to study more and more, they kept learning more and more that it was heart tissue, that it was real blood, human blood, that it had human DNA, that it had white blood cells, so it was living. And they kept going. And all of these cases happen to be, again, the case in this sample. And you can still see it to this day. Here's a fragment. Here are the white blood cells. Do you see the dots in the picture over on this side? No, on this side. Do you see those dots? That's the white blood cells. Again, it's real easy to see in the microscope. They're either there or they're not. And if you take those dots, which are the white blood cells, red blood cells don't have DNA, the white blood cells do, you can find the human DNA. And they did. Enters another person. His name is Dr. Frederick Zugabe. I have his name down here. Dr. Frederick Zugabe is in New York. He passed away by now, but he lived in New York, up where I lived. I was living in New York till 2 years ago. And he was asked to look at these samples because he's a forensic pathologist. And so here's me. I'm like, okay, he should have the data that I want, right? He's in New York. I was in New York. I know my way around there. He's a forensic pathologist. I want to see his data. I still couldn't get my hands on it. But he said that he confirmed that the sample corresponded to the muscle of the heart, the myocardium, and the white blood cells, and all of that. This is where the story comes back to East Texas a little bit. Just while I'm sitting in my office over at the Chancery in Tyler, putting this talk together, so this was a couple of days before I gave the first talk at the Cathedral Center, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna say I'm reading the book. I haven't seen the data. I'm trusting the book, which I'm okay doing because I don't think those people were lying about it at all. I still wanted to see the data though. This was when, I don't know if you remember, the bishop, where did the bishop go over Christmas? Do you remember? He went to Australia, thank you. Y'all remember better than I did. He went on a long trip to Australia. And while the bishop is in Australia, so he's already sent me the video, and I'm like, I don't know. While he's in Australia, he sends me another email, and it says, I met this man. I was in a little chapel in a small town outside of Sydney. And this man walks up to me and says, I have some studies I've done on the Eucharistic miracle in Buenos Aires. This man in Australia, his name is Ron Tessiorero. He is the man who is now Pope Francis, Cardinal Bergoglio. He's the man that was appointed to be the reporter and to oversee the scientific investigation with Dr. Zugabe in New York by the Archbishop. And so not only did he have all the chemical analyses, he had videos and interviews with these professionals. And he says, "Hey, Bishop, here." He gives him these books. And the bishop emails me and says, and the bishop doesn't know I was going through this. The bishop had no idea I was like, I really want to see the data. He had no idea. I get an email, the bishop's like, "I met this man outside this small chapel in Sydney, Australia, and he's going to send you some books." No reason. I had not asked for them. I had no idea who this man was. This man had no idea who I was. The bishop has no idea why this man walked up to him in Sydney, Australia after Christmas. The man had since mailed the books. I hate to say that I'm this stubborn, but I am. The books were still sitting on my desk, unopened, the day I was supposed to give the talk at the Cathedral Center in February of this year. Still sitting there unopened because I'm just like, whatever. I want to look at it. That day, because I didn't know they had the data in it either. I didn't know that's what they were. I thought maybe, I thought good, he saw it, but I didn't know it. I thought, okay, I'm going to look in the book. I opened this one, Unseen, New Evidence. And it says life, the origin of life under the microscope. It's not even about the Eucharistic miracles. But I happened to turn, I'm looking through the table of contents. You can't see this, but I'll show you. These are the scientific, he put them in an appendix in this book that was sitting on my desk that I really wanted to see. The scientific data, I don't know, God put the scientific data on my desk because I was having my own doubt. And I looked at it. Dr. Frederick, here's the test from the genetic lab. Test results, there's 10 pages or so of test results here. And so I got a chance to look through them. Dr. Zugabe, by the way, in New York, this forensic pathologist, he is, I just want you to know who he is. The man he's talking is the Australian.
Nothing on the origin of the sample. Looking at it, he had no doubts about what this was and where it had come from. Heart tissue. There's an inflammatory infiltrate here, but the inflammatory infiltrate is mixed. It's a mixed stuff. It's actually a mix here. In other words, the heart tissue itself is degenerated. It's degenerated. In other words, what happens sometimes after we have the heart attack. This is a person that had a heart attack, but not a meeting. In other words, the person had to do that a period of time after this. For at least a few days after this. Now, what there's other things that are important, just like a oil that's in heart attack. They don't know the real activity. Where the chest project and what is on the a person getting these you get coronary injuries from that. You get coronary injuries from people who get CPR incorrectly, and a person comes out that area may die off. We have been given custody and freedom to do any tests that are needed. The first step in having the tumor identified was pathology testing, and it was New York forensic pathologist Dr. Frederick Zugabe that was to give the most definitive answer as to what the substance was. He was told nothing of the origin of the sample. Looking at it, he had no doubts about what this was and where it had come from. Heart tissue. There's an inflammatory infiltrate. In other words, this is what happens sometimes after a heart attack. This is a person that had a heart attack, but it's not a meaning. In other words, the person had to have lived a period of time after this. For at least a few days, at least after this. Now, there's other things that can cause this type of a item that resembles a heart attack. It automobile accidents.
Okay. So I just want to interject here. First of all, the first voice that you heard was the man in Australia. You can hear his accent. This is Dr. Zuckerby in New York. They did not tell Dr. Zuckerby anything. This is what you do in good science. They took the samples blindly to him. They just took the samples and said, we want you to analyze it. We're not telling you anything about where the samples came from. They just gave it to him, and they turned the cameras on and started listening, okay? So I just want y'all to know that. All right, now I'll finish.
Where they get chest crushing and it causes damage to the heart. You get it from a person getting beat up across the chest. You get coronary injuries from that. You get coronary injuries from people who gave CPR incorrectly, and a person comes out of it, that area may die off. If, say, the injury hit this area of the heart, right here, that person would probably die, because that's a major anterior descending coronary artery, left main, circumflex artery. That would stop bringing oxygen and nutrition to that part of the heart, and that part of the heart will then die. If it was over here, then this part of the heart would die. The rest of the heart would look perfectly fine. You know, I've written over 100 papers in cardiology. I was director of cardiovascular research with the Veterans Hospital. I'm a full fellow in the American College of Cardiology, as well as being a forensic pathologist. And the heart is one area that I know. This is my business. It's really not too far. It's not too far from the valvular area. I think it actually comes from about right in this area, right in here.
And what's the function of the heart?
That's the left ventricle. It's a major area that pumps the blood to all parts of the body. That's the left ventricle. When all the blood comes back to the heart, and the heart contracts and shoots the blood out to the brain and to all other parts, it has to be shut out through there. The right ventricle only pumps the blood to the lungs to get oxygenated for oxygen purposes. Now, what's the history?
So he says, I don't sound like I'm yelling. Thank you so much for fixing that on the fly. I appreciate it. So what he's saying here is, just to say it again, because I had to watch this a few times. This was a DVD that the man from Australia sent to me for no reason. It's this doctor looking at the heart tissue. This is a forensic pathologist. He didn't just say the sample I'm looking at is heart tissue. He's done so many autopsies that he can tell what part of the heart the tissue comes from. The part of the heart, that's what he was diagramming there. This tissue that he was looking at from the Eucharistic miracles in the 1990s in Buenos Aires came from the part of the heart that pumps the blood out to the rest of the body, that gives life to the body. The other side of the heart just pumps the blood to the lungs to get oxygenated. The other side, if that side is damaged, the person would die because that's the life to the body. So the story deepens. It's not just heart tissue. It's not just living. He's also pointing out that there are still white blood cells this person just died, and the person is living. He's also pointing out that this person died from heart injury, that there's a lot of white blood cells. So if there's no injury and the person dies, you don't see the white blood cells. You know, like when you get a scrape on your knee and the pus runs there, the white blood cells. There were a lot of white blood cells in this blood. So, I mean, this was many years later, a handful of years later. It's living, it's injured, it's from the part of the heart that gives life to the rest of the body. That's not all, though. So this is the stuff I wanted to see. No, go to the next. Hold on. Try to- Oh, here we go. There we go. And it was still type AB. Not only all of that, okay, so just getting back to where I started with all of this, I don't know why, for reasons I don't understand. I wanted to know this for sure and see the data, and I saw the data. What's in this book, the other thing that was baffling me is that this is human DNA. But when they did the test, they said there's no human paternal imprint. It's human DNA. They were baffled. It's human DNA. But when they look at the DNA of one of us, they can look at certain regions in the DNA, and they can tell your mother and your father. They had human DNA, but when they looked for those regions that come from mother and father, they were none. And the theologian said, well, duh, Jesus didn't have DNA from a human father. So we don't know why that is, we just know that it is. And I've seen it. I saw the results from the lab, and I know the test. I know what they do. They don't look at the entire genetic code of the entire DNA. They can sequence DNA now, but before they could sequence DNA like they can now, they would just look at certain parts that they knew were human, and so they could tell mother and father from looking at those certain parts. And when they look for those certain parts, they weren't there. What I really wish somebody would do is do an entire sequence. Now that we can. This is something that developed since the 90s that can be done now. I have no idea if somebody's trying to do that or if they will or whatever, but it's interesting. And yeah, I can say that I've looked at the data now, and it's not there. The last miracle I wanted to talk about because it adds something else to the story. I tried to build these in a way. This one was recent, 2008, in Poland. So far away from Buenos Aires and Argentina. This one was in Poland, and a similar story. The sister saw the red stuff on the consecrated host, and she was amazed, and they still have it today. That piece was taken and analyzed. These two doctors in Poland at the University of Białystok, Professor Maria Elżbieta and Professor Stanislaw Solkowski, Polish doctors, they analyzed, they're medical doctors, cardiologists, they analyzed it. I won't bore you, I don't even like to say it that way, but same stuff. Type AB, white blood cells, that really shouldn't be, but yeah, again, there it is, another miracle. It comes from the same part of the heart. This time, however, when they took the samples to the lab to get tested, they were accused of murder. Because they're bringing fresh heart tissue from somebody who just died. Like, the only way you could have gotten this is if you killed somebody yourself. They're like, no, we didn't. And there were people, thankfully, that could testify that they didn't kill anybody. In fact, it had been several years old at the time that they took the test. They also confirmed there was no preservative. They confirmed nobody was messing around because these samples had been guarded. So the church was very careful to guard them and make sure nobody did mess with them. One last thing. When they looked at these with the electron microscope, which is something new to the story, what they saw was I did self-assembly, building nanostructures, and I know, I can tell you that when you try to make molecules, it's not like playing Legos where you just like, molecules do this. They follow the rules of nature as God created them, and you have to know what you're doing, and oftentimes you're not quite sure what's going to happen. You can't just assemble molecules at this level. Under the electron microscope, they saw heart tissue intermingled with the molecules of bread that are in bread, in the proteins. They saw it intermingled, and the person who looked at it said, it's as if the bread became body. And so there was this intermingling. You can't fabricate that. You can't make that up. It doesn't happen. So there we go. All I can say is let all mortal tissue be silenced. And with fear and trembling stand. And the point of these, like I like to get all analytical about it, and I apologize if it gets boring, but I think it's important to know just the level of detail that has been studied in our time. Okay, this is different from any time before. And it's just there. It's like God's repeatedly it's there. And what it means to us is, I think, so I've been Catholic since 2006. And I was telling my husband the other day, it's like, I don't know, I'm not having a crisis of faith, but sometimes it's like, kneel, stand, cross yourself, go home, come back, do it again, do it again, do it again, hi Jesus. It's like it just starts to get so repetitive. And it's not that I'm doubting, it's not that I have any less faith, it's just that awe that used to be there. I mean, the first time I received communion, I thought I was going to pass out. And for 2 years that I had to go through the RCIA classes and the things to prepare to receive communion, I went every day to daily mass with 2 babies and pregnant, hauling them in every day to mass, and went down as close as I could get to the Eucharist and crossed myself because I wanted to get as close as I could. My husband said, why? You don't have to go every day. Like, I know you're trying to be a really good Catholic, but you don't have to go every day. And I said, look, I love science, and if somebody said, Stacy, every day, 10 minutes from your house, there was going to be a miracle, I would go. I would go. So it's just logic for me. I need to be there. And I went every day, and it was profound to me because it was my way of saying, I believe. I'm going to change my whole life to be Catholic. I'm going to accept everything the church teaches. And I'm going to trust that even if I don't understand why I have to do some things, there's a reason, and I'll figure it out when I do the test in the laboratory of my life. And that's exactly what happened. Everything I've trusted in the church, I eventually understood that's why we're supposed to be open to life. That's why we're supposed to honor the sacrament of marriage as permanent and never being destroyed. That's why we're supposed to take our obligation to go to Mass seriously. And so what this means, it'll mean something different maybe for all of us. I hope that when you're in Mass and you look at the Eucharist, it's changed now, that you never look at it the same way again. That you know these miracles are out there, you can travel and see them, the data is there, and that God is indeed that loving Father who, I guess every now and then, treats us to something special just when we need to know that we're loved. And what it means to me is, it says in the Catechism that if you make the Eucharist the source and summit of the Christian life, you're signing up for a life of suffering. It says that in the Catechism. You will suffer. And I tell myself, and to you, that's what I want you to get from this talk. If you forget all the chemical stuff, it's really exciting, I know, but if you forget all the chemical stuff, no matter how much you're suffering, no matter how much you're in pain, even when the pain in your heart is greater than any physical pain you can feel, when your heart is breaking, when you're the most desperate, we are held in existence by the Creator. We meet the very Creator who holds all the atoms and molecules together in our body. If you knew what it took chemically for your heart to beat one more time, you would get on your knees and weep for joy. Scientists don't even know all of that. For us to be here, for our existence, for God to have caused everything to happen, scientists now believe the Big Bang, all that happened 14 billion years ago, it all had to happen just so to get here today. It's a miracle of sorts that we're here in this room all together today because we love Christ. So keep that in mind. That's how I live now. And I'm very honored to have a job with a bishop who takes the Eucharist so seriously and tells me, your job every day is to lead people to heaven, to teach people about the faith. There's nothing more important. Everything we do, every choice, every decision is about getting to heaven and leading other people there too. That's what the gift of every day is. That's why we have one more breath. And so knowing something this profound, it's a miracle, I think, when my kids clean their room. That's a miracle without being told. There's a lot of things I would call miracles, but it makes me just ever constantly aware that God's right there with us, holding us in existence, and He loves us, and that if we just keep the faith, that He will have mercy on us, and that if we get to heaven, no matter what we're suffering right now in life, everything will be okay. Thank you.
the last 2,000 years throughout the world, we join in the service, praising God and asking Him to fill us with peace, especially in time of suffering. And I will do the first stanzas, and you all can join with the legal alternative. To the Lord, in the house of my distress, I call and he answers. tongues of the deceitful, what shall we pay in future? O treasures come, the warriors ever sharpen, and force with not blessing, along the eye chronic strangers, will long the names of value.
Lord, have you had a heaven dwelling with those who hate peace? I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for hiding.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,
As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.
we move on to Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountain, from whence shall come my help. My help shall come from the Lord, who made heaven and earth.
May he never allow you to stumble. Let him sleep not your guard. No, he sleeps not nor slumbers. Israel's guard.
The Lord is your God and your shade. At your right side he stands. By day the sun shall not smite you, nor the moon in the night.
The Lord will guard you from evil. He will guard your soul. The Lord will guard you from going and coming, both now and forever.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.
We have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. I rejoice when I heard them say, there stood God's Son, and now our feet are standing with your gates for Jerusalem.
Jerusalem is built as a city, strongly compact. It is there that the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord.
On his trials and anointings, they are to praise the Lord's name. They are to be set the rules of judgment of the house of David.
For the peace of Jerusalem pray, peace be to your homes. May peace reign in your walls, in your palaces peace.
The love of my brethren and friends, I say peace upon you. The love of the house of the Lord, I will ask for you, God good.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.
If when we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him by death of his Son, it is all the more certain that we who have been reconciled will be saved by his life. Not only that, we go so far as to make God our host through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation.
The Lord is risen. Hallelujah.
He has appeared to Simon. Hallelujah.
Let us pray. God our Father, look upon us with love. You redeem us and make us your children in Christ. Give us true freedom and bring us to independence with promise. We access through Christ our Lord. Amen. Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
The Almighty God bless you and His expression all, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. because of the timing, I will not ask you to right now sign up for coming to this the exhibition, but we will make sure before you leave, we have a sign up to make sure that you sign so that we know how we have gone through the exhibition. But also, dear friends, this Eucharistic medical exhibition will deepen your understanding of the whole Eucharist, your devotion. And here, those who come to our regular retreat, we don't have an adoration chapel. So we like to see many more new adorators coming to our chapel. And if your hearts will talk to Miss Mary and or regularly or you keep Sangachi, we are looking for more adorators to our adoration chapel. And also we have a book available on Eucharistic miracle, and those books available. Also, if you want, we will be glad to order for you, and we will be there to take your orders in case if the heart moves. And we have all the Spanish translation on the table, so those who are comfortable with Spanish language, you can read. And I now invite you to kindly go all the way once again to the very entrance. Follow the arrows, and you can simply start from the very first table set. And so just walk around, and exit will be the gymnasium this side will be the exit. And also for children, if children want to spend their time coloring and everything, if parents want to time away from the children, we do have the children's corner on the stage. Thank you so much, and I hope and pray this is going to be a wonderful opportunity. This is open now till 9 o'clock today, and tomorrow again it will be open from 10 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Monday, 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Tuesday, 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Wednesday, 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So plenty of share the story. And also we have the press release in case you want to understand more about the Eucharistic miracle. You are most welcome to pick up press release that I made. Thank you. And now enjoy. God bless. And also